So we have an ancient word from Genesis, book 32, book 37, chapters 1 through 4, or verses 1 through 4 and 12 through 28. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all the other brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of the Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal had devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life," Reuben said to them. "Shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with the sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite trader passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Next, we have a contemporary reading, and it's by Richard Rohr, and it's an excerpt from The Universal Christ. Love, which might be called the attraction of all things toward all things, is a universal language, an underlying energy that keeps showing itself despite our best efforts to resist it. It is so simple that it is hard to teach in words. Yet we all know it when we see it. After all, there's not a native, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Jewish, an Islamic, or Christian way of loving. There's not a Methodist, Lutheran, or Orthodox way of running a soup kitchen. There is not a gay or straight way of being faithful, not a black or Caucasian way of hoping. We all know positive flow when we see it, and we all know resistance and coldness when we feel it. All the rest are mere labels.
Thank you, Greg, for the readings. down for the music, and Jocelyn for the technology, and Alex for holding up the back of the room there, and for everyone for joining us this morning. I wanted to begin with a little bit of rainbow news. I'll just say, first, there's a funny story that I read, and I guess it's all over the place, but I only saw it one place, that some rainbow defenders are saying that we have stolen the rainbow, that you have stolen the rainbow, that is, we who advocate for LGBTQ plus people, and that it really belongs to God. And there's some quite funny takedowns of that idea in various newspapers or news outlets and so on. And I just kind of like the idea that, the rainbow doesn't belong to anybody, but it can symbolize many things. So I have one with me this morning. I'm going to count off a few items. I'm going to bring you a few news items. So on the positive front, President Joe Biden spoke Friday at the opening of a visitor center for LGBTQ history in New York, and this is the Stonewall National Monument Visitor Center. This is the first in the nation federal monument to LGBTQ history. Well, here's one. There's a bookstore in San Francisco that sends boxes of LGBTQ books to people in states where they're hard to get. Oh, let's see. A federal judge struck down key parts of a Florida anti-trans law. There's a small town in Arkansas, which is a safe haven for LGBTQ plus residents, Eureka Springs. So if you're in Arkansas, Eureka Springs is a good place to go. It's one of the first towns in the South where gay couples get married. Research shows that pro-LGBTQ laws are positive for mental health. And in 20 years of research of marriage rights for same-sex couples, research finding shows consistently positive social benefits. And the LGBTQ community, as is always true, always active on some cause, they're working to protect a historically LGBTQ beach in New York. Now, I could keep going. I mean, there's lots of good news out there, and it's interesting how it's all over the newspaper. You don't always even have to look for it. Sometimes it's right on the front page. So, for example, when President Biden this week announced that he would undo the law that had thousands of gay and lesbian soldiers kicked out of the military and lose their pensions, et cetera. He was going to undo that, and people could apply and get their pensions, et cetera, back. So that was a really good one. I mean, there's good news all over the place. There's some sort of maybe so, maybe not. So as I said, the veterans' benefits will be available to them, but it's not going to be automatic. They're going to have to apply, which can be pretty complicated. As if anyone has ever filled out a government form, you know that it can be complicated. Here's one that many read as positive, but some go, I'm not sure. The first transgender woman and Asian American won the Miss Maryland contest. Some people are wondering, well, what happens to women who are born women when they're not the only ones in the contest? So there's a challenge for people there. Corporations are facing challenges to their inclusion policies, so much so that sometimes they're withdrawing their support for gay events and so on. It looks like LGBTQ seniors, it can be hard for them in many ways. Now, when it says the Supreme Court is going to review a policy that affects LGBTQ folk, whether it was a policy that was opposed or in favor of them, it's kind of, we don't really know if we want the Supreme Court to review that, so I'm not sure how that one goes. Soldiers in Ukraine who are being discriminated against are campaigning and demonstrating in their own favor. Why we feel dismayed that they're being discriminated against. And the final one, because I could go on all day, because I've got pages and pages of this stuff. There's a veteran who recently died and wrote in his obituary about being gay. And he had never come out publicly before. So that's a real positive. But the idea that at the age of 85, and he was no longer here, he finally felt like he could say who he was, that's kind of painful. And then things like a judge blocking trans protections as part of Title IX, or librarians who are being attacked because there are affirming books in their libraries, or, let's see, I'm trying to find one that's not too dismaying. This is it's just a little amusing to me that at the last minute, Ohio Republicans forced through an anti-trans bathroom ban. So, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, all the ways that we might vary from an anticipated sexual orientation or identity based on birth, which is what some are arguing is the only valid way. It's out there. And we might think this is a new thing. I mean, to listen to the complainers about all this Q-positive stuff, they say if we could only go back to the Bible days, everything was clear. Marriage is one man and one woman. Wait, Jacob in this story has 4 wives, or that men are men and women are women. But this story of Joseph is a little more ambiguous than it seems at first. Just a little background in case we want to place Joseph in the larger Bible story. We are in the book of Genesis, and this is the book about the ancestors way back. And so Joseph's father is Jacob. Jacob's father is Isaac. Isaac's father is Abraham. And in all those families, there were problems because of favoritism of the father and or the mother favoring one of the children. This seems to be a core element of the sort of background here and of a lot of the tensions in the Bible. And these parental favoritism problems come up later in the Bible as well, of course. But Joseph is the 11th of 12 brothers. He was born to Rachel, who was Jacob's favorite wife out of his 4 wives. And so that might be part of why he was a favorite. It could be partly because Jacob was older, and a lot of times older fathers, it seems like they have a little more attention for their babies and they just find them adorable. At least this was the case in my family of 6 girls. My youngest sister was clearly the favorite, but not only with my dad, with everybody. My mother, 5 sisters, this kid had a lot of attention. Beautiful attention, wonderful kid. So the dreamer, the brothers mention, here comes this dreamer. Well, in some verses that were left out, Joseph has some dreams that show 11 sheaves of wheat bowing down to him. And other situations where it's clear that Joseph is going to be over all the others. So these dreams, of course, didn't sound very good to 10 older brothers in a situation where the oldest brother is supposed to be on the top. So between the favoritism and these dreams, things are not looking so good. Another thing here, it sounds like Joseph is a bit of a tattletale. He brought a bad report of his brothers to his father. So a tattletale too, right? So, there's a lot of stuff going on here. But one of the big things that makes this passage interesting for us, well, it's not because Joseph is immature. He is, right? He's 17, and it sounds like a little bit of an immature 17-year-old. He wears his fancy garment out to the fields to go and visit his brothers, saying, here comes the favorite, right? He's told on his brothers. He has dreams that he's better than his brothers. The ancient rabbis had a hard time with this story for multiple reasons. Many of them are not in this particular part of the Joseph story, and we'll talk about some of those later parts in other weeks. But in this story, Jacob gives Joseph a long robe with sleeves. Well, the Hebrew for the long robe with sleeves there is ambiguous. People disagree about what the words that are translated here with sleeves might mean. But that exact phrase, in fact, anything similar to that phrase, only occurs in one other place in the Bible. And in that place, it's talking about Tamar and Amnon, two of David's children. Tamar, his daughter, Amnon, his son, by two different wives. And Tamar is wearing a dress, which is the kind of dress that is worn by the daughters of kings. So Joseph here has been given a robe that is like the dress worn by the daughters of kings. The rabbis are trying to figure out why this might be so. And why was he at home and not out with his brothers? And what did it mean when he was a helper to Bilhah and Zilpah? So there's apparently some ambiguities in the text. So people like to, from the beginning, rabbis were writing, who is this Joseph and what does this story mean? And in the last 30 years, there's just been an outpouring of scholarship from people who use what's called a queer approach to biblical research, and by others, looking back at these rabbinic traditions about Joseph. And so in most of the rabbis, nothing particularly notable in this regard, but quite a few of them, Joseph is seen to have ambiguous sexual orientation. There's some kind of an unconventional gender dynamic here. So in 1920, Louis Ginsburg, the great Jewish scholar, published a book called Legends of the Jews, in which he paraphrased earlier Jewish scholarship. Now, you may remember that one mode of Jewish biblical interpretation is called midrash. And what midrash means is that you read the Bible and you notice that there are places where there are gaps in the story or things are unclear, and you think, well, what might have been going on there? And you write that down. So Ginsburg paraphrases one of the early ones. The original one from the 3rd century, but he says, "There was something boyish about Joseph. He painted his eyes, dressed his hair, and he walked with a mincing step." And what the original actually said was, Joseph was 17 years old. 17 years old, and you say he was a boy? Rather, he would engage deeds of girls, apply makeup to his eyes, fix his hair, and dangle his heel. So from at least the 3rd century, and we can think that probably even before that, the scholars were saying, who is this Joseph, in a deeper sense? Now, it might not be important exactly what the rabbis said about Joseph, but it does seem to me that these passages show that from early on, the Jewish people knew that gender identity was not a simple either or, that a boy might even wear a girl's dress, or he might wear makeup, or he might flirt with his heel. So early on, we see in the Jewish tradition a recognition that all is not so simple. And that's one of the challenges that we're having in our own time, isn't it? People who say, we want to go back to a time when everything was simple and straightforward. And even in our own tradition, what we see is there never was such a time. Now, we can look at the literature of other parts of the ancient Near East and find similar discussions, similar presentations of people with ambiguous gender expression. We can find them treated in different ways in different traditions. I mean, we know that in Leviticus there's something about men should not lie with men. That was really about the priests. It didn't necessarily talk about the general population, although it's read that way today. But what we see is that this hope that we can go backwards, to the time of the U.S. Constitution, and anything they didn't know about then doesn't exist now. We don't need to think about rifles that can shoot 80 bullets a minute because they didn't exist in 1784 when they signed, 86? What year did they sign the Constitution? 86? Bob Harmon, you might know. But at any rate, there are many challenges that we're having politically in our own time, socially in our own time, that reflect not the outlook of the people of the Bible, who, yes, they wrestled with gender identity, with gender expression. They wrestled with who belongs with whom. They wrestled with who wears a dress and who doesn't, who does their eye makeup and who doesn't. I think it's curious for us in this time as an open and affirming congregation, one that welcomes everyone, regardless of who you are, where you are on life's journey, how you identify, what you mean to yourself. We want to know each person as you are. We want to know each person as you understand yourself. We want to know each person as your understanding of yourself changes. Because if we are to be the kind of community that Richard Rohr was pointing us toward, a community of love, one that recognizes attraction as the universal law of the universe, love as the primary ground of what brings people together, if we're going to be faithful in our own ways, each our own ways, we know positive flow when we see it, and we treasure that. And we also know resistance. James Baldwin noted that once hate is gone, you have to deal with pain. And I wonder if Joseph's brothers found that too. Once their brother was gone, once he was out of the picture, did their hate continue? Did they continue to resent Joseph? Did they believe that, okay, it's now settled? And if they were able to let go of that hate, could they then really examine their pain? The pain of being a family where favoritism distorted the life of the family, where a history of favoritism was passed down from generation to generation, where a history of sibling rivalry led people to abuse their siblings, to take away from their siblings what was rightfully theirs, to rape them as Amnon did to Tamar, after which she tore her princess dress. These kinds of abuses that come out of our hatred, if we could let go of our hatred, let go of this draw to make someone else's life more difficult, if we could let go of that hatred, what pain would we find in ourselves? Because I do know that each one of us has experienced pain. Pain in how we were treated, in our families maybe, or in our school, or at work, or in the neighborhood. I grew up in a family of 5 sisters, and in our neighborhood, we were the subject of ridicule because we had no brothers to defend us. It was the brothers who did the defending, and who was going to defend us. So these things shape who we are. But when we let go of that pain, and when we welcome the possibility that we can heal that pain by listening to each other, by sharing with each other, by showing our love for each other and for all people, by welcoming all people, maybe we can shift the story so that it is no longer a scandal that Joseph wears a princess dress, or that Miss Maryland this year is a trans woman, or that former soldiers are restored to their workplace rights, or when a trans person uses a bathroom that corresponds with how they see themselves. It's a challenge to us because we seek to show this love and this welcome. And I think it's a challenge to us to say, how do we more fully live into that welcome? We have our rainbow flag. We occasionally hold events. Is there a way that we can make ourselves more welcoming, more obviously welcoming to all? Parents of kids who are having a hard time, the kids themselves, young adults, older adults who can't come out till they're 85 years old. Is there a way that we, by living into our own calling as an open and affirming church, can help to turn the tide toward positive news, all the news on the right-hand side of the rainbow? Or should it be maybe I should have done it right and left. I mean, right and left is a little confusing these days. But in any case, what can we do? That's our question. What are we called to do? Friends of Joseph. Amen.